Hey everyone, let's jump right into today's explainer. As a scholar who spends a lot of time exploring that fascinating intersection where continental philosophy meets theology, I am absolutely thrilled to unpack a truly gripping paper with you all. We're looking at the Baha'i Praxis, translating theology into social action, written by Iman Motlagh Arani. What Arani is doing here is presenting a really compelling argument. In the Baha'i Faith, classical metaphysical speculation doesn't just hit a dead end and stop. Instead, it totally transforms. It morphs directly into concrete, ethical social action. So we're going to take a journey today, stepping out of the most abstract clouds of theological thought and walking straight down into the grassroots reality of community building. For those of us studying how religious thought evolves, this is the perfect entry point. Just think about the post-Kantian philosophical world for a second. We collectively realized that we can't perfectly grasp the divine through pure detached contemplation anymore, right? By definition, the absolute essence of God is fundamentally unknowable. So, what happens when we inevitably smash into that epistemological wall? Do we just throw our hands up and give in to nihilism? Well, Arani argues no. Theology doesn't end in silence. It actually reaches a culmination point where it has no choice but to change its entire form. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We have 5 main stops. First, the End of Abstraction. Then, redefining sacred praxis, moving into the Continental Philosophy Connection, followed by language and community action, and wrapping up with institutional spiritual reason. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The End of Abstraction. Okay, to really wrap our heads around this shift and what actually happens when centuries of deep, speculative theology hit that wall of unknowability, we have to define Arani's concept of the primal will. Since the absolute essence of God is completely out of our reach, our metaphysical starting point is this primal will. You can think of it as the exact metaphysical bridge where transcendent divine intention crosses over into human history. And it does this through the manifestations of God. Figures you know like Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah. They act as these flawless mirrors reflecting the will. And here is the absolute key point to remember. This divine volition isn't just sitting up there meant to be quietly contemplated. No way. It actively seeks expression in the real world through order, moral progress, and social evolution. Section 2. Redefining sacred praxis. Let's map out the historical landscape of praxis just to see how radical this shift really is. Going way back, we have Aristotle, who basically saw praxis as action governed by moral virtue to achieve human flourishing in a just society. Then, fast forward to modernity and the Marxist view, where praxis completely changes into revolutionary restructuring, literally overthrowing material exploitation. Following on the heels of that, liberation theology basically baptizes that Marxist struggle, turning praxis into an ethical response to systemic injustice, standing right alongside the oppressed. But then, look at the Baha'i model. Where Marx and liberation theology lean heavily into structural antagonism and systemic conflict, the Baha'i model pivots entirely. It emphasizes a unity-centered, nonpartisan approach. It's all about building brand new moral architectures driven by spiritual education. And this brings us to one of the core arguments of Arani's whole paper, the massive difference between structural demolition and transformative construction. Arani is very clear that Baha'i praxis definitely doesn't reject the need for structural change. The world needs changing, but it transfigures how that change is supposed to happen. Instead of violent rupture or class struggle or tearing down the opposing political party, it relies on patient, highly participatory reordering. It's essentially a form of radical social hope. It creates transformation without the hatred and liberation without the violence. Section 3. The Continental Philosophy Connection. This is where the academic synthesis really shines. Let's start with Martin Heidegger. Arani connects Heidegger's famous concept of Mitsein, which translates to being with, to the central Baha'i principle of the oneness of humanity. Heidegger argued that human beings aren't just isolated, detached brains floating around observing a universe of objects. We are always already situated in a shared world with others. Arani points out that the Baha'i writings echo this beautifully. The self is only fully realized through profound ethical connection with other people. True spiritual progress, it's literally impossible in total isolation. We are wired for connection. Then Arani brings in Iman Levinas, who did something incredibly radical in Western philosophy. He placed ethics before being. For Levinas, when you encounter the vulnerable face of the other, it fundamentally interrupts your own freedom. It demands an infinite sense of responsibility from you. The face itself speaks a silent command: thou shalt not kill. You can't just reduce another human being to a category or a label. You actually have to answer to them. So, how does Arani tie this all together? He ambitiously, and I think masterfully, argues that Levinasian ethics find a perfect theological home in the Baha'i framework. In this paradigm, the other isn't just someone who holds basic human rights. The other is literally a mirror of God. The divine image is engraved on every single soul. Because of that, encountering the other is essentially standing before the divine. It makes the ethical turn toward justice and compassion more than just a good moral duty. It becomes the ultimate act of spiritual worship. Section 4. Language and community action. For those of us studying how social action actually works on the ground, this is how all that high-level abstract philosophy becomes reality. These tools for community building, they aren't just nice social programs. Arani calls them forms of embodied theology, whether it's children's moral classes, interfaith devotional gatherings, or grassroots social action initiatives. These are the actual spaces where spiritual meaning is generated collectively. They are the living crucibles where this grand theory of human unity is tested out and enacted in real life. Now, here is a real lightbulb moment from the paper, the Baha'i principle of a universal auxiliary language. Arani posits that the sheer linguistic fragmentation we see in the world, something Heidegger actually warned about when talking about the loss of shared meaning, is directly addressed right here. And to be clear, this isn't some bureaucratic demand for everyone to abandon their culture and speak the exact same native tongue. Not at all. It's an auxiliary language meant to basically reverse the myth of Babel. It's designed to reclaim our fundamental human capacity for communion, making sure that the inner reality of every soul from every culture can be translated and understood without erasing what makes them wonderfully unique. Another deeply practical piece of this is the methodology of consultation. This is how communities actually make decisions. Think of it like this. You bring your thoughts to the table, freely and honestly, but then you have to detach from them. You let go of the personal ownership of your ideas. The group synthesizes the diverse perspectives and yields to whatever the collective truth turns out to be. Arani brilliantly frames this as a lived, embodied form of Levinian ethics. It's a system designed to ensure the voice of the other is heard without ego, without someone trying to dominate the room, synthesizing individual thoughts into unified, just action. Section 5. Institutional spiritual reason. So we have to look at the ultimate framework that governs all of this collective praxis on a global scale. Arani points to the Universal House of Justice, the supreme governing body of the Baha'i Faith. What's absolutely crucial for us to grasp here is what this institution is not. It is not some rigid, dogmatic tribunal handing down fixed mystical oracles. Instead, Arani describes it as the praxis organ of revelation. Its job is to operationalize divine intention in an incredibly complex, fast-moving modern world. It is, in a way, the institutionalization of post-theological authority. The contrast to historical religious governance is pretty stark. Rather than imposing rigid dogma based entirely on absolute traditional authority, the Universal House of Justice relies on adapting collective insight. It uses constant learning, factual scientific inquiry, and that very method of consultation we were just talking about. It takes the timeless principles of the faith and adapts them to the ever-changing realities of human history. It's a sacred rationality, for sure, but it is highly, highly adaptive. As Arani nears the end of his analysis, he categorizes humanity into 4 distinct moral spiritual states, but he sets this up to prove one massive central point. That 4th state he describes, the idea of claiming deep mystical insight or profound theological knowledge while simultaneously failing to embody virtue and social action. In this framework, that is a theological impossibility. The category just collapses on itself. True recognition of the divine requires practical, boots-on-the-ground fidelity to advancing unity and eradicating prejudice. Faith without action isn't just bad practice here. It's practically an oxymoron. It's inherently hollow. And so that leads us right to the overarching takeaway for our study today. Theology, having finally exhausted its speculative limits, having admitted it can never fully map out the unknowable essence of God, must not just pack up and go home. Instead, it has to begin anew. It transitions entirely into a sacred, lived practice of civilization building. The true horizon of theology is the ethical realization of divine purpose, right here, right now, in the very structure of our communities. I want to leave you, my fellow scholars and learners, with this final, genuinely provocative question. We've explored a beautiful, highly cohesive philosophical synthesis today, but the real test is always in the application. Can a unity-driven post-metaphysical framework truly withstand the intense friction of modern, lived human history and effectively dismantle systemic prejudice? It's a question that demands far more than just deep thought. It demands action. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.